Welcome to another version of Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly broadcast in which we interview people about their spiritual lives and how they support others in lifting their spirits. I'm Reverend Joel Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice here in Newburyport, and I also offer spiritual counseling virtually on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, meditation teacher at North Shore Insight Meditation Community.
Our show is based on the following four principles. One, everybody is spiritual. Sometimes we're conscious and active in our spiritual lives, sometimes not. But even when we're not, we're still spiritual.
There are many ways to lift your spirit, not only through formal religious or spiritual practices, but also through art, nature, human relations, and service to others, just to name a few.
Each person's spiritual path is unique to them and may change in small or large ways over time.
It's important to respect your own spiritual journey, trusting that one step naturally leads to the next, and to respect other people's unique spiritual journeys, even though they may be much different from your own. We're not here to convince you of the benefits of any particular approach or techniques, but rather just to offer you food for thought.
Today we have as our guest Lori
Mangano.
Mangano,
But
okay.
people say Mangano.
I had a whole debate with, what's her name, Bob's assistant,
Oh,
about how it's pronounced, and I had it wrong. So.
most people, I think we had it wrong growing up.
Oh,
We said Mangano, and it's really Mangano.
Mangano, okay. As you can tell, I have a relationship with Lori. We worked together at two different hospices many years, and in a spiritual support group that went on and is still going on for, 10, 15 years or so. And she's had a very interesting spiritual life, which you are about to hear. So I'm so happy to have you here, Lori.
Happy to be here, Joe.
So as you know, we start with asking people to share about their spiritual journey, going back to growing up and wherever you want to lead it
Okay.
to from there.
Sure. And I have to just acknowledge that you've been a big part of my spiritual journey. Meeting you and working with you, and you, Ted, too. Just wonderful. So, okay, I know my spiritual journey started when I was a very little girl. I grew up Italian Catholic in New York. In Mount Vernon, you know New York, right? So
Yes.
not far from the city. So I went to Catholic school because the public schools were pretty wild in Mount Vernon, both elementary and high school. And I was fortunate, I always say I'm fortunate to have parents who are spiritual Catholics. I don't feel like I have to say I'm recovered Catholic, as some people say. I feel like I was really, really grateful to have such a nurturing, both through my parents and through the schools. I had some very inspiring nuns. I was the generation that had some tough ones, but also some very inspiring. So my growing up was a very rooted, solid connection to spirit. I felt very drawn to Jesus and Mary and the saints, and they have carried me through to this day. Also, as a child, while growing up Christian, I was very connected to Native American. I don't know where it came from or how, other than spirit, but I swore I was really Native American kidnapped by this Italian family. And I had seen a powwow dance somewhere on TV, and so we had a circular hallway in our home, and I would do the powwow dancing around, in my mind, that's what I was doing. And I just was drawn to the spirituality, I had to have the Native American dolls, and my family knew it. They just kind of thought that's Lori, but I just was drawn, and I knew that there was some connection somehow. When I was a teenager, And we had encyclopedias. We didn't have Google, as you know. And so I spread out all the encyclopedias and opened them up to all the different tribes that I had learned about or could come up with to see which one I kind of felt I was part of. And I was drawn to the Sioux and particularly the Lakota. From that day on, I just thought I was part of that and had this desire to learn more about Lakota and to someday go and visit. And so, I eventually, well, before I skip to that, I went through, as we all do, probably in teenage years, a period of angst, a period of shutdown, not where I ever left the spirituality, but where I lost the connection to myself, to that part of myself, to, like, it was part of me. It was still part of my world, but it wasn't as personally connected. And I have had many, I guess you would call them mystical experiences that brought me back, particularly during hard times. Dreams that weren't really dreams. I've had many really personal connectedness visions with Jesus. I feel like on the movie Elf, I know him. If you've seen Elf, that's what so it was always part of me. And as I learned, once I started studying with a Lakota beautiful soul medicine man who I've been studying with for 10 years, I learned that it was through those times that I could reconnect more deeply. We'll get to that. But so when I got married and had my children all knew that in my heart I swore I was Native American, and everybody just kind of allowed that's Lori, But when I went to, I think I started working for Constellation, and Wanda, who was there only 2 weeks while I was there before she left, had told me about this health expo. And I went to the health expo and I just beelined to the Native American booth, and that's where I met this medicine man, who is now chief of the Wampanoag tribe. His father's side is that. On the mother's side, there's Lakota, where he lived in Pine Ridge for many years and studied the Lakota Holy Way. I don't know what it is about Lakota, because he speaks different languages, Algonquin, and they don't all come as naturally to me as Lakota sounds to me like Italian. Like I say some prayers in Lakota. I pray in Italian. I pray in different languages. It's one of the things that's just a part of what I like to do. I would say one of my shutdowns as a child, we all have them, it's what forms our egos and who we are, was around dance. And the desire and the strong desire and love I had for dance that was kind of severed at an early age. And so it was a real loss for me. And finding my way back to that was, I know I kind of jumped all around, but before I ever had gotten married or had my children, I was in my 20s, period of seeking, and joined this group called the Parish Mission Team in the New York diocese. And I remember the man who started this, Father Jim Conlon. He has since passed, but I connect with him. He had said to me, I want you to do sacred dance. And I said, oh no, I'm not a dancer. I had just put it in hobbies on my resume. And he just would give you this smile, this twinkle in his eye and the smile. Well, I'm going to send you to South Bend, Indiana to study liturgical dance and sacred dance over the summer before we start our missions. Well, I went there, and something was reborn in me, reconnected to that child who liked to dance. And I started to do sacred dance. It didn't come as, I don't want to say it didn't come as naturally, because the dance itself did, but the ability to do it in front of people. So we would go to all these different parishes. Sometimes there were small parishes up north. Sometimes they would have 1,000 people, big parishes in the city. And I used to think, there must be a lot of dancers out there, and they're going to know I'm not a real dancer. And then one of the guys on the mission team said to me, remember why you do this. And I did this dance for Good Friday. I was, it was a big parish, and I just focused on the prayer. And at the end, when we were greeting people, this older man came up to me and took my hands and said, I really felt that. And that was when it turned around for me, that this is really not about my technical ability as a dancer, but my ability to pray through art, through dance, through movement.
I grew up as a Catholic. I had no idea until you started talking about it, and I read your bio, that dance had any place within the Catholic liturgy or the Catholic Church generally.
Yeah, and you know, Ted, when we started doing it, we were very respectful of it is new, and it does involve the body, and how comfortable would everybody be with that? And I have to say, there was not one parish that didn't let me dance. And we were in hundreds of parishes. One of them said, I kind of like to see it first, so I did it for the school. And he said, oh, you have to do that during Mass, during services, during missions. So
Wow.
I'm happy to say that they were very open to that expression. You know, there's more quotes in the Bible about dance, Old and New Testament, than there is about, I think, even prayer. There's a lot about praising God through dance, through symbols and dance, sound, and yeah.
Wow.
Could you sort of describe the dance, maybe analogize it to other types of, like ballet or ballroom dancing?
I
or-
would
or-
say, if I was going
Native
to,
American or what?
if I was going to make an analogy to a type of dance, I would say it's Martha Graham kind of expressive.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And I've seen a video of what you've done
Oh, yeah.
recently on the beach. And
At 64, I did
quite
that one.
beautiful, quite beautiful.
That one was during COVID, and Chief Tom Frederick, his native name is Winunamwau, Speaker of Truth. He would have church services. Actually, I'm ordained through his church, the Church of Our Lady of All Nations, Church of All Nations. And he asked me to record once, because we were doing Zoom church during 2020. And I remember I loved the song El Shaddai, and I remember bringing it to the beach one day and just listening to it and looking at the words and taking a walk with it and letting it bubble up the way creativity does. And I felt very clearly guided to come during sunrise. And I had to find someone who was willing to go as early. Believe me, there was not a lot of people. My younger daughter's friend, who I've known since she was 2, she showed up with her friend, and the ability to use the iPhones and recorded it at sunrise for me. Yeah.
Do you know about the Cosmic Mass?
The Cosmic Mass?
Yeah, which is a dance free with a mass in it. Started by excommunicated priest who had a school of
Matthew Fox.
Matthew Fox. Thank
Oh,
you.
yes, yes, yes. I'm familiar with his work. Yeah, yeah. It's very, to me, it's my purest form of prayer because I'm wholly present. My mind's not wandering. I'm present in the body and soul. I dance every morning. Devotion to a Mary dance that I do. My knees are creakier, my joints are not what they were, but I will say one other thing about the real healing in the prayer of dance came during a powwow. So I actually started going to real powwows, not the made-up ones in my childhood. And even then, there was that self-consciousness that 2 elderly Native American men who dance beautifully, they dance so much energy, invited me into the circle to dance. And so I started to dance, and they were very encouraging. And, you know, when you dance in the powwow, they tell you what the song is about, and, you know, when you're invited to come in, the intertribal dances, and there's people standing around. I was very self-conscious that I'm a wannabe, and, you know, the whole thing, and I just wanted to be careful and respectful, and so I was always a little self-conscious until 2022, which I call the year, which, as you know, is the year my older daughter was going through a very rare cancer, rhabdomyosarcoma in the throat, and it was a year of 14 rounds of chemo, 7 weeks of radiation, a G-tube, the whole thing. It was quite a challenge spiritually. And one weekend, I was able to go to a powwow. In the summertime, I usually go to all over, but because I was helping take care of her, I was able to go one weekend. She said, go, I have someone to, you know, be with me. And I went to that powwow, and usually when you enter the circle, you know, they they sage you, and you offer a prayer before you go in. And that day I could only pray for her and for the chief's wife, who was sick at the time as well. And I prayed for the two of them with my whole heart, and I prayed for everyone who was sick. And then I said, I can't look at anybody. I just couldn't look because I couldn't come out of that prayer. And something happened in that prayer, in that dance, because I twirled and did things I don't normally do, and it was spirit-led, and it changed everything for me with dancing and powwows. And the healing, the first healing for dance was the sacred dance. Because I was like, as a child, I'm going to be on Lincoln Center, I'm going to be a ballerina. But when that was taken away, the healing was, I'm going to dance in God's sanctuary. And then this seemed to be a coming back to that child who danced in the hallway without really knowing why or how. So there's been a kind of a full circle with the powwows.
And along with dance, another art form that you've been involved in is art and art therapy.
Yes.
And,
The creative arts are totally a way that I pray. I have always, when I majored in art, again, not really good at this as much as I'd like to be. I was an art major, fine arts major, technicality and all this, and kind of lost my way, for a few years, like, what am I going to do with art? I went on a retreat that my father had told me about, and I was like, yeah, he's telling me all year, I might as well finally go. I went on this retreat with my mom. It was a women's retreat, at Cardinal Spellman Retreat House in the Bronx, along the Palisades. And the priest had said that he had office hours if anyone wanted to talk to him. My mother's nudging me, go talk to the priest, go talk to the priest. And I said, what am I gonna say? I like art and I like people, and there's no job for me. And so anyway, I signed up. I went to the appointment. It was 4:00. He was a few minutes late. Usually I am. So I was like, that's it, I'm leaving. He comes walking down the hall, and we sat and talked. He was from Pennsylvania, visiting priest, and I said, my mother told me to come. I don't know what to say. I like art. I like people. There's no job for me. And he said, I wish I knew what to advise you, but have you ever heard of art therapy? Well, I had gone to a school that had art therapy. Had anyone, it was kind of my own fault, because it's another story. It was an all-girls school, so I went to Iona because I didn't want to go to. So that counselor had no idea what to advise me. But the College of New Rochelle, where I had art, did offer art therapy. So I went back, got my master's in that, and wrote him a letter thanking him that I had become an art therapist. And that was a healing too, because it's about expressing yourself through art. It's not about how good you are as an artist. Actually, it's almost better if you don't know what you're doing, because it's freer and more expressive.
Yeah.
And that brought me back to being able to express myself more freely through art.
and your application of art therapy, who did you work with?
I worked first in a psychiatric unit where I did my internship. And so I was there a year doing my internship, and a year staying there to get my accreditation. And I didn't want to stay in psychiatric. It was too much in the mind, too much. I mean, I loved the art therapy piece, and they asked me to do some movement therapy as well, so I incorporated art and movement. But I knew it wasn't the place where I was going to stay. While this was in the 80s, early 80s, so while this was happening, they were forming a new hospice on the other end of the hospital in their oncology. And I said, I want to go there. And so they let me split my time between psychiatric unit and hospice, and that was it. I was like, this is what I want to do. But I took a year off after getting my accreditation, and that was when I joined the Parish Mission Team. And we did so many creative things on the mission team. The missions were week missions in different parishes, not the old fire and brimstone, but missions of love and forgiveness and coming home to yourself, which is a key I want to mention. But we did clowning and puppetry in the schools. We did home visits to people who couldn't make it to the missions. And that further fed the love for hospice, because these were people who were homebound or And so I knew when I left the mission team, that was what I wanted to do, was go into hospice.
And you just said, I will speak about that. I forget what it was that...
What was it I said? Coming home.
Coming home, yeah.
So I would say probably what sums up what I even do in my practice in Sacred Oak Healing Services today, and I work a lot with children. And this actually started with bereaved children. I had created art therapy groups for bereaved children in a hospice in New Jersey. Little ones, really little ones, had this desire to go visit Pop-Pop in heaven, or, they didn't understand. I happen to have with me, because I carry with me in my glove compartment, an emergency puppet just for these reasons.
You
If you
have it with you?
Yes, of course.
Great.
Doesn't everyone have an emergency puppet? And so I started this with children, but I really think it's the crux of what I do in my practice. So I tell children, this is a puppet that one child named Rainbow.
Oh, great.
And so I tell them that we are all like these little diamonds before we're born. And some people call it our spirit, our soul, our sparkle, our essence. And when we're born, it comes into our body like a hand in a puppet. And so it's in there. You can't see it, but it's there. And so, we go through the whole birth process. We play with puppets, what we're going to be when we grow up, blah, blah, blah. And when at the end of our life, whenever that is, when the body no longer is alive, that spirit goes back home.
Wow, that's
So that's
beautiful.
the connectedness to ourself. In the medicine wheel, which I base it resonated for me when I learned about the medicine wheel, which is how God, Creator, Wakantanka, whatever you want to call Great Spirit, communicates to us through our very humanness, through emotion, spirit, mind, and body. So this connectedness it's always there. It's just that we forget. I'll get back to the medicine wheel. But in the schools, I also worked with children with behavioral problems, and they were afraid to come to my classroom because they thought it was like a punishment room. So I would go around with this diamond, this big one, and I would tell them, this is what we're like. We're shiny and we're bright and we have this spirit in us, and it gets dusty, dirty, or muddy, and then we forget, and that's when behavior happens. And so when they come to my room, my only job is to help them polish it off and remember who they are. So it's the connectedness to self. And they're so cute. They'll say, like, where does it go when I'm bad? It's still there. It's just that we need to remember. So we do a lot of that, and they get it. They feel, instead of feeling like they need to go visit Pop-Up in heaven, they feel that person around them. They know that there's just this veil, that we're all connected. And to me, prayer is that part of us that's yearning for that connection, the seeker. We're either seekers or sleepers, right? So we're either seeking that connection, which prayer to me is like an embrace of this great spirit of love, of whatever we perceive that to be. And I feel like that's what, it's not all, I feel love when I go pray and I feel like I could just om and I'm at peace. It's also pouring out. And back to the medicine wheel, the emotion, spirit, mind, and body is, I think we learn growing up that there are certain things that are not okay to feel, to think, to do. We learn certain emotions aren't okay. And yet it's through that we connect. It's through the pouring out. The way I would describe it is, there was a shaman who said to me once, we perceive this abyss between body and spirit. We perceive that we go and pray, and then we go back to work, and then we go or meditate or do yoga, and then we, go back and that there's an abyss. And he said to me, an enlightened person, a shaman, is someone who walks both worlds, and there's no abyss. And the more you do this work, he said, the smaller that becomes until there is none. Well, I could understand that, but I couldn't, I do go pray and then I go back to work. So how do you manage that abyss? And it was studying with the medicine man where I finally got it. And it's a practice. But he said, when you take a breath, That's all you have to do. You don't have to spend 45 minutes in prayer. It's nice when you can, but you could be driving and you take a breath, and it's the connectedness to the source of life that makes that heart beat, that makes that breath go out. There is no separation. There's no separation.
Yes, that's so important. And earlier you were talking about the dreams that aren't really dreams, and alluded a little bit to my own, having had those myself. I mean, visitation by my mother that felt as real, deceased mother felt as real as anything that's ever happened to me. But sort of, and that just left me with the sense that the barrier between the worlds is much more permeable than this culture recognizes, and that it's can be a source of great comfort to realize that someone who is deceased actually is still here, still is accessible, and there may be communication, there may be dreams, there may just be the sense of touching them in some way.
It's almost palpable. I have felt my parents' presence in moments of great joy. Like when I did my first wedding, I officiated. It was with a 90-year-old couple. The woman had been in my bereavement group, and I was so happy. I actually could feel, it's another story, but I could feel their presence. I could feel their presence in moments of great pain. So I access that probably by being in that medicine wheel, kind of like what I'm feeling emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically. I call them my Garden of Gethsemane prayers, because I go to my sacred space and pour out my fears. It started when my younger daughter had taken a trip to Lithuania, and I knew it was going to be hard, and I pour out and pour out. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus receives the angel of consolation. And I will tell you, every time you pour out in a place that's sacred, you receive that angel of consolation. And the awareness of other people around, or the presence of sacredness.
Is that, I mean, certainly in Buddhism, there's a sense of emptiness of self, which is an emptying process. In Christianity, there is the kenosis, which is also an emptiness of self, and that the pouring out seems to be kind of the same thing, where it's becoming in contact with a part of you which is common to everyone and is just much deeper than the kind of surface personality that we walk through the world with.
And I would say, Ted, I was a dabbler in emotions until I really started to do this work, and the journey where you pour out, it's another process I use in my practice, that I learned what real emotions feel like, because growing up with trying to keep everything peaceful and, going into prayer that way, I learned, probably through my girls, because that's who I pray for all the time amongst everyone else in the world. The year that my daughter was going through that was probably, I'm talking about the mystical experiences where I would pour out and actually had so many awarenesses of her path, seeing her soul communicate with the divine, seeing her soul, and it was almost like she was having this conversation with Jesus, and it wasn't my business. I couldn't hear it, but there was no charge around. Oh my gosh, because there was charge for me. Like, how's this gonna go? And I had to sit back and realize, and I could feel. There's so many times I felt my mother's hand on my shoulder, my mother with her. You're so raw at those times, I think, and so open that maybe that opens you more to being able to receive that. Because when everything's fine, it's a different energy, and not that you can't be as open, but there's something that breaks you open when you're, I always say that year I would, have to move my car a million times because she had this apartment in Cambridge and we didn't have the visitor pass yet, and I got so many parking tickets, I used them as bookmarks. I would walk up and down Cambridge, and I said I look like the little old Italian ladies with the beads hunched over, praying, and I would have to say, stand up, breathe, and and, be aware. And it was raw. It was, I always say, for all the things I've gone through in my life, a divorce, COVID, it was cake compared to going through that year.
Yeah, very profound, life-changing.
Absolutely.
And my daughter had told me to read this book, Between Two Kingdoms, before, it was like 6 or 9 months before she was ever diagnosed. And you may remember, Joel, I used to quote from it all the time in our groups. It's written by Sulika Jayoud, I think is how you say her name. And she was a young woman going through leukemia, and she is married to John Baptiste, the beautiful singer, this American Symphony.
Okay.
So this book I used to quote from, because she talked about how art and writing were so, helpful, and she has beautiful quotes about grief. And so then when my daughter got diagnosed, Sulika had relapsed. And so we were following her on Instagram and everything, and she invited us all, anyone, followers, to do 100 days of creativity, to do something creative every day. And so it was the beginning of my daughter's diagnosis, and it turned into a year of creativity. It was mostly writing, because I didn't have as much time to do art. I would be like on her couch in her studio apartment. I just put things into my phone and write, and I swear it saved me. It was because I couldn't, sit there and cry. I had to do what needed to be done. But I needed a place. We need a place to put those emotions, the expression. And so it was poured out in my writing. So it became a year of it. And, I still had to go through the PTS afterwards, and the letting the ice cube melt, as I say, in the grief world, when you're frozen first and then it melts, and finding a place to express it. So
you got to tell the end of the story, how your daughter is now.
she is, talk about an amazing spirit. She is working for the Sarcoma Foundation of America. She totally changed her life. She is in a healthy relationship. She teaches bar and soul. She does 5 and 10K races. She's a beautiful, determined spirit. My younger daughter also flew in every month from Chicago to help take care of her sister. Amazing. And watching their spirits, I've seen their spirits since they were born. I saw that in them since they were born, but there was something about watching that, I would say, as excruciating as that year was, is as extraordinary and palpable as the love and support of prayers of people, of that part of us, that is capable of so much,
So you mentioned in my practice, and you referred to Sacred Oaks earlier. Could you say a bit about
Sacred Oak Healing Services is what I call it, because the oak tree represents going through the door of transformation with courage, grace, and resilience. And when my life coach sister was helping me come up with the name and images, she said to me, "So what image do you have of going through a doorway?" Instantly, my kindergarten hands clinging to the doorway as I'm being physically pulled into the classroom came up, and I said, "Wow, I had an image of being physically forced into kindergarten." And she was quiet on the other end of the phone and said, "We'll have to work on that." But I realized that is how we go through our doors. We don't just go flowing through them with courage, grace, and we cling.
Yeah.
One friend of mine, that friend on the mission team who told me to remember why I dance, Jamie, he said, "You can tell the things you let go of by the claw marks." And I was like, "Oh, yeah."
I like that. That's great. Yeah.
So in my practice, we do mind, body, spirit. We do medicine wheel work. We do a process called The Journey. TheJourney.com actually is where Brandon first had introduced the diamond, that I actually wrote a children's book about it, but that's another story. I'll let you know when it's in print. We do Reiki training, medicine wheel. We walk the medicine wheel with children, adolescents, adults. It's an honor. It's an honor.
So you're an individual practitioner in that?
Yeah, I
Great.
call
And-
myself a wellness practitioner.
Okay.
There's different rules here than I'm a therapist in New York, so I don't call it therapy. It's more, and plus I've taken a different road
Yes.
from that, where I'm not as, where it is more spiritual, it is more holistic. So, holistic wellness practitioner.
And are you easy to find if someone is
I think
looking
so.
for you?
If you look up Sacred Oak
Sacred
Healing
Oak.
Services, it should come
Okay.
up. Yeah.
That's great. Can we talk a little bit about grief too? Because that's how we met.
Yes.
That you were the grief person at the hospice where you and Joel were working, and I was a volunteer and gravitated to that particular area. And I love that analogy of the piece of ice that's frozen and then it melts. I've also been, ever since it happened, it has stuck in my memory. We had a little training session, and you asked
Yes.
people, how long, what's the difference between mourning and grief, and how long does each last? And in my wise guy approach, I said, well, mourning is the number of bereavement days the HR department gives you.
Right on target.
And you said, yeah, that's it. Mourning is a period of time, but grief is forever. And that has really stuck with me, and it's just felt
Yeah.
so true.
And it's funny you bring that up because I didn't even used to get my first calls about grief until 6 months when the ice cube starts melting. Grief or trauma freezes us, you know? And so we kind of function. During that year with my daughter, I was like, wow, I'm in great shape. I'm going up and down the stairs when the elevator's not working. I'm like, I was on adrenaline. I crashed the next year. You know, so we're in that frozen place, and when the ice cube starts melting, we start feeling, we start emoting. People call me and say, I thought I was doing fine, but I'm really not. And but when you had said the grief days, the mourning days, there was a study done at UCLA where they asked people how long they thought it took to grieve. And the most common response was 72 hours to 24 weeks, which is 3 days to 6 months. And I said, I didn't get my calls till 6 months. 72 hours is the days we're given off to grieve.
Yeah.
Grief to me is forever, because when I miss that person, you know, I'm in the physical. It's nice that I can connect in the spiritual, but I miss calling my parents and talking to them, or, you know, my friends. I miss people I've lost. So I'll always grieve them. It just doesn't feel as heavy.
Yes.
And the mourning process is not 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 years at least.
Yeah.
And then we start to reconcile with life without this person in it. But that's a process.
Yes.
And like I said, we need a place to put it, to express it, to be witnessed and validated, not to be fixed or moved along or
Right,
healed.
and the terrible tendency in this culture to say, well, you must be over that now, or get over it,
Oh.
even worse.
I had a nickel for every time someone told me that they were told it's been 6 months, or it's been...
Yeah, and it may be years and years, and it may, you know, and it returns, you know, anniversaries.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, just the sunlight hitting a room in a certain way that somehow brings back a very vivid memory. It may be years and years later.
And when we start to view it as, would you want to not be grieving that person? Like there's a saying, to avoid grief, we must either lose our memories or cease to love. And one dear woman I worked with in one of the many hospices, Eleanor, she said she had lost her mother at a younger age, and she said, grief is like my old friend. It's become like my old friend. And I think it might have been Elizabeth Gilbert who said, it's in the back seat now. It doesn't drive the car, but it's always with me.
Beautiful.
And I would not want to ever forget or cease to love. So grief becomes our companion.
So here you are with this puppet and these stories and
Rainbow.
all, and the art and the dance. Sing Sing.
Sing Sing.
What are you doing, Sing Sing?
Oh, that was one of the mission team days. I was doing like recreation therapy with them. Actually, that's where the story of being Native American kidnapped by an Italian family started, because so I worked with the AIDS unit in Sing Sing. So I worked with the people who were dying. It was a small unit. And I would do either spiritual. I was with a nun who was she worked there, and so she would bring me in, and we would do recreational if they were allowed to go out. Most of them, you know, could only go out for bits at a time. But there were people in general population, if they were on good behavior, who would come in and cook for them, and you know, so that one guy asked me if I was Native American. I was so happy. That's when I started. I embellished my story. But Sing Sing taught me a lot. It was people of all different religions, and I remember having all kinds of discussions about religion with some of them, and then we would look through the bars of the window and watch the sunset. And that kind of connected me to my childhood. I always had an innate knowing. I think we all have a knowing. Mona Lisa Schultz, who wrote Awakening Intuition, said it's like a transistor radio. A lot of people don't know what a transistor radio is these days. I would say it's like your Bluetooth. It's always there. You just have to turn it on. And I had a knowing as a child that there couldn't be children who were being raised in other religions and being good people who didn't have it. Like I just knew every religion has its truth, every religion has its mishigas, right? So
Mishigas is craziness for people who don't know Yiddish.
So anyway, it was a beautiful experience to be able to work with them. It's an honor.
Are there pieces that we haven't brought up that you'd like to include? I mean, you have so many facets to you.
I was thinking, it's funny you say that, because after listening to some of your shows, I was like, wow, they have cool people on. Why are they asking me?
You're a cool person.
Thank you, Joel. Back at you. I guess the more I travel on this spiritual path, the more human I become. You always think you're going to ascend to this enlightened state, and the enlightened state is being very present to the humanness and what the mishigas, right? I mean, and that's where the connection is. That's what that whole medicine wheel is about. I think I saw a lot of that in my writing during that year. I actually wrote something called If Sarah Had Known. It was the day before my daughter's birthday, when she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed just before her 30th birthday. Do you want to hear that?
Yeah.
It's called If Sarah Had Known, and it just, there's so much. Some of my writing was prayer, some of it was just pouring out, some of it was raging, some of it was panicking. But this one was one of the first ones, and it's based on Abraham having to sacrifice his son Isaac. So I said, if Sarah had known that Abraham was on his way up the mountain to sacrifice her only son, the son they had waited for years, that God had requested Isaac as his chosen sacrifice, that they were being tested to see if they were obedient to the one who meant the most, she would have been anguished, bereft, and raged. She would have begged, pleaded, sobbed, bargained. She might have even felt herself to be losing her mind, tried desperately to think of other options, ways to convince Hashem and Abraham to make a new plan. She might have taken Isaac up the mountain herself, held him by his hand, worked diligently with him to build and prepare the altar. Then she would have laid down upon it herself and said, "Here I am, Hashem. Take me, please, take me instead of him." But that is not the way of Hashem. He asks us to sacrifice that which means the most to us. He teaches us that our children are not our own. He breaks our hearts and then binds them. He asks that we stand at the foot of the cross of those we love the most. He asks that we be brave and trust him even when all seems lost and darkest. He asks us to believe that there will be light, that the sun will rise, that we will taste joy again. He asks a lot.
Beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
Now, there is Midrash. Midrash is the stories, the interpretations of what's in the Bible. There is Midrash that Sarah died not that much later because of her grief of knowing what almost happened.
Wow.
So it's
See?
very
Look at that.
connected to
Wow.
what
Thank you
you're
for
writing.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know, you were using the term Hashem, which is Hebrew for the name.
Yes.
In Judaism, we don't have a spoken name of God, so
Right.
we use other terms.
I work with, Joel, and where that came from in me, that Hashem was, I work with a beautiful Jewish community in New York by Zoom, by distance, or by phone, who are mostly all second-generation Holocaust survivors. And just beautiful. I met them by journey workshops in person, and just have stayed connected to many of them. So
Wow, that's very powerful.
yeah.
The breadth of your experiences, it's quite something.
Yeah, maybe it's good that I have a little ADD because I can go to a million directions.
So we're getting close to our closing time, so that question, what would you suggest for people to lift their spirit?
So I guess the pouring out prayers, whether they're of joy and gratitude, so much joy and gratitude. You asked how my daughter is now, and my daughter's and so much anguish of the world and everything. So I think it's the pouring out of all of it is the connectedness and taking that breath. I mean, when I was walking down those streets, I had to remind myself to breathe. And that diamond thing about being connected in that, when that divine meets the human, then everything and everyone becomes sacred. And that's where there's no abyss, is in the sacredness of ourselves and of each other. And I hope that in my practice I help people find their own sacredness, because if we don't find it in ourselves, we don't see it necessarily in each other. And that's why there's so much of this in the world right now, instead of, let me understand you because you're sacred too, even if we disagree,
Yes.
So I think the bringing together, there's no separation. When we bring it together, then we see the sacredness in ourselves. Can I just conclude with one little quick dream or vision?
Yes,
Whatever
please.
it was.
Yeah.
I would think I was on my way to one of the death cafes we were doing in Portsmouth Library, but I had woken up in the morning and said, I'm going to sleep 15 more minutes. Set my alarm. And in those 15 minutes, had this dream where I was at one of those health expos, and there were people getting their picture taken, like Polaroids. They were coming in, having their picture taken, and leaving. And I've seen like aura pictures and all that, but that wasn't this. It was just a Polaroid. And I remember thinking, what's so healing about that? So I went over to the booth and I said to the person, what are they getting, Polaroids for? And the person said, oh, because the picture I give them is of how God sees them. And I woke up thinking, what would that be like to have a picture of how God sees me? And I would say that sometimes when I see my clients, I think, boy, I wish they could see themselves through my eyes, but I wish they could see themselves through God's eyes. And myself too, it's a challenge. I mean, we're hard on ourselves, and if we're hard on ourselves, we're missing that sacred, in our brokenness, in our humanness, in our bereft, in our grief, we are connected to that divine. We are sacred. All of it is sacred.
Yes.
The grief is sacred.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing.
you, Paul, for having me.
Yeah. So when
usually-
you do this, you were talking before about namaste,
Yes.
Yeah.
divinity within you from the divinity within me.
And usually I give children a diamond to remember who they are, so
Oh,
you can
that's so
remember
Thank
who you are.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful to have you here.
Same here.
Really enjoyed
Thank you,
this
Ted. So good to see
conversation.
you.
Yeah.
And you, Jill.
So thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us today, and come back again next month for our next incredible guest, whoever that might be.
Thank you.